Millionaire freezes when he sees his black ex-wife at airport with twins who look just like him. Hi, my beautiful Alcot Stories family. I'm so grateful to have you here once again, where emotions come alive and stories touch your soul. Before we begin today's emotional journey, I just want to say a little prayer for you. May your heart be light, your burdens be lifted, and may love always find its way back to you, even when life feels heavy. I know many of you have been following these stories for a long time. Your support, your comments, your presence, it means the world to me. But, sadly, YouTube has been freezing my channel lately, and it's heartbreaking. And I know it's not because you don't love the stories, it's because many of you just forget to like the videos or subscribe after watching. And that's okay, we're human. But now more than ever, I need your love and support to keep this channel alive. So please, before you dive into this story, take one little second to tap the like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, hiver, so we stay connected and strong. We are in this together. Always. Now, let's begin today's powerful and emotional story. Get ready to feel every heartbeat. Dominic Wade had everything money could buy: private jets, boardroom power, and a name whispered with awe across five-star hotels. But the moment Serena Brooks walked into his life, none of it seemed to matter anymore. Her soft brown skin, the gentle curve of her braided hair falling across her cheek, and the depth in her soulful eyes struck something he'd never known existed within himself, something tender and vulnerable. She wasn't like the women from his world, the ones draped in designer clothes and greed. Serena was poetry in motion, humble, brilliant, and so full of love, she didn't even realize how deeply she deserved it. Their love began behind closed doors, in shadowed corners of opulent hotel suites, where silk sheets, tangled around their bodies and stolen hours, felt like lifetimes. Dominic wasn't just addicted to her touch, he was drawn to her spirit, the way she spoke gently to the silence, the way her laughter made even the coldest nights feel warm. In those hotel rooms, she called him not by his wealth but by his name, with a softness that made him feel human again. Serena, with no hunger for his riches, would run her fingers down his jaw and whisper, "I love the man, not the millionaire." And those words stuck deeper than any business deal he'd ever made. Every time she smiled in his arms, the ruthless tycoon melted. Every kiss felt like a promise carved in breath. She would close her eyes and rest her head on his chest as he wrapped his arms around her, whispering, "You're my peace in a world full of war." Dominic had never opened up to anyone like this before, but with her, walls crumbled without force. He began planning a future where she wasn't just his secret, but his forever marriage, children, a home far from boardrooms and betrayal. They made love as if they were writing history, not just sharing bodies, but carving memories into time. She showed up in a simple sundress, no makeup, no lies, just love, raw and real, and he fell harder every time. When she laughed, he swore angels were jealous. He took her on spontaneous trips: Paris one weekend, the coast of California the next, but it was never about the destination, only her hand in his. She surprised him with breakfast in bed, ironed his shirts when he had early flights, and once stayed up all night just to pray for a deal he was anxious about. She didn't ask for anything in return but his time, his truth, his trust, and he gave it until the shadows started whispering. Linda, his longtime assistant, sharp and calculating, watched them from the sidelines with quiet bitterness, hiding jealousy behind polite smiles. She'd always wanted more than her desk job. She wanted Dominic, or at least the version of him that didn't belong to Serena. It started with subtle jabs. "She's beautiful, but can she handle your world?" Or, "You don't really know where she came from, do you?" Dominic laughed them off at first, brushing it aside with, "Serena's not like that." But Linda was persistent, poisoning moments with doubt, planting seeds she knew could one day crack even the strongest roots. Dominic, a man trained to calculate risk, found himself calculating love, something no calculator could ever solve. One night, while Serena slept peacefully beside him, Dominic stared at the ceiling, Linda's words echoing like a whispering ghost. "Be careful who you trust. especially when they come from nothing. He hated that he even considered it. But love is delicate, and doubt is a dagger. Still, in those moments of weakness, Serena would roll over, place her palm on his chest, and smile in her sleep, and for a moment he'd forget the world outside. They shared inside jokes, danced barefoot to old records, and made love as if the world could end the next morning. When he was with her, he wasn't the ruthless Dominic Wade, he was just a man in love, a man who dreamed of forever, with a woman who touched his soul. She would hum lullabies her mother taught her while folding his clothes, and he'd just watch her from across the room, wondering how he got so lucky. Once, she traced a scar on his shoulder and said, "Even your wounds are beautiful to me," and it nearly brought him to tears. They had fights. Sure, no great love is without fire, but they always came back to each other, stronger than before. She supported his dreams like they were hers, defended him when tabloids lied, and kissed his fears away like magic, and he held her like she was made of stardust and sacred things. But the storm was brewing. Linda's jealousy curdled into manipulation, weaving lies into emails, photos, fabricated stories that made Serena look like she was hiding something. Dominic tried to ignore it, but his mind started slipping, began reading into texts, questioning her late calls with family, wondering why she smiled at strangers. He never asked, never gave her a chance, just watched her with quiet suspicion. Serena sensed the shift, the way his kisses felt colder, his hugs a little looser. "What's wrong, Dom?" she asked one night, her voice fragile. "Nothing," he lied, too proud, too broken by shadows to admit he was drowning in doubt. Yet, even then, she stayed, made his favorite meal, lit candles, played his favorite jazz, just to bring his smile back. He saw all of it, felt all of it, but still, he allowed the whispers to win. Serena's love burned bright, but even the brightest flames can't survive if the wind of doubt keeps blowing. What they didn't know then was that the cracks had begun, cracks that would lead to heartbreak, betrayal, and a separation neither of them would survive unchanged. But in that moment, in that chapter of their lives, their love still lived in every kiss, every touch, every stolen breath between two souls who were once everything to each other. The love that once burned like wildfire now stood at the altar, dressed in white silk and trembling with hope. Serena, radiant in a gown that hugged her every curve, looked up at Dominic as if he were the only man left in the world. Her braided hair, adorned with delicate pearls, eyes shimmering with unspoken promises. The ceremony was intimate, hidden from media frenzy, with only a few close allies invited, the soft music of violins guiding them through sacred vows. Dominic held her hand with reverence, slipping the ring on her finger like it was the final piece to complete his soul, whispering, "I choose you, Serena, in this life and the next." Her tears spilled as he kissed her knuckles, and for a heartbeat, the room held nothing but truth. They were officially bound by law, but more deeply by love, stepping into forever beneath an arch of white roses and promises. She laughed during their first dance, her bare feet gliding over the polished floor as he spun her gently in his arms, whispering playful things only she could hear. Champagne flowed, guests clapped, and the room glowed with joy, but not all eyes celebrated. In the far corner stood Trevor Knox, Dominic's childhood friend turned business partner, sipping his drink with the kind of smirk that spoiled good wine. Trevor had always known how to wear loyalty like a disguise, always watching from the sidelines with a hunger for something that wasn't his. Dominic didn't notice at first, was too busy watching Serena feed him cake with a soft giggle, too lost in the way she wiped frosting from his nose and kissed him like they were the only ones breathing. But then, as the crowd thinned and soft jazz played in the background, Trevor approached with a hand on Dominic's shoulder and a whisper soaked in poison. "You sure she's not just here for your money? I've seen her with another man," he said casually, like it was a passing observation, not a grenade disguised as concern. Dominic blinked, the smile fading from his lips like morning dew under sun. He didn't reply immediately, just stared at Trevor, trying to read his expression, but all he saw was smugness hidden behind fake friendship. Trevor clinked his glass against Dominic's and walked away as if he hadn't just dropped a shadow into the heart of a perfect day. Dominic turned to find Serena across the room, laughing with his aunt, her eyes lighting up like they always did when she was at ease. But now, his mind wasn't at ease. Trevor's words played on repeat, crawling like ivy around his ribs. Who was the man? When did he see them? Why hadn't Dominic seen it? The questions began to scratch against his peace, dragging doubt through the door of his heart. He tried to shake it off, telling himself Trevor was jealous, maybe drunk, but even then one sentence was enough to steal the innocence of everything that followed. Serena ran to him later, wrapping her arms around his waist and whispering, "I still can't believe I'm your wife," and he kissed her forehead, smiled, but something in his eyes flickered, a shadow she didn't yet notice. That night, while she undressed and lit candles in their honeymoon suite, he stared at her with eyes searching for answers she hadn't been questioned about. She kissed him with fire, her hands memorizing his body like always, but behind his touch, hesitation grew like a crack in glass. Serena, still glowing from the vows, danced barefoot on the rug, asking, "What should we name our future daughter?" And Dominic said, "Let's wait," the joy in his voice not matching the confusion in his chest. She didn't catch it, not yet. To her, love had won. To him, love had entered crossfire. Over the next few days, Trevor's whisper became a phantom companion, sitting silently between every conversation, every kiss, every attempt at happiness. Dominic watched Serena with new eyes, not because she changed, but because suspicion had changed him. He noted every phone call she took in private, every smile she gave to male hotel staff, every moment she wasn't in his arms. Once he saw her texting and asked, "Who's that?" She smiled. "Just my cousin. Andre's checking in on us." He nodded, but inside, doubt roared louder than logic. He hated himself for feeling this way, but the words, "another man," echoed louder than, "I love you." Even when Serena planned a surprise dinner under the stars and wrote him a handwritten love letter, he read between the lines, searching for signs of betrayal that weren't there. One night, he stared at her phone while she was in the shower, feeling ashamed, but still scrolling, and found nothing. Only photos of them, reminders of how happy she really was. Still, he couldn't let it go. His mind had become a courtroom with no defense lawyer. Trevor had left a crack, and now Dominic was chipping at it with his own hands. He never asked Serena, never confronted her. Instead, he watched and waited, letting love suffocate under the pressure of imagined betrayal. Serena began to notice how his eyes sometimes felt distant, even when he was kissing her, how he pulled away quicker, spoke less, touched her like he was afraid of being burned. She cried one night asking, "Is something wrong with us?" And he said, "No, I'm just tired," and turned away. But inside, he wasn't just tired, he was tormented. Trevor had done his job well, and Dominic, once a lover who would fight the world for Serena, now stood as her silent accuser without trial. And so, the seeds were planted not with a storm, but with a whisper, and their love, though still alive, was now living under siege. The tension that once whispered between them now screamed in silence, heavy and suffocating, as Dominic stared at Serena with eyes no longer full of love, but filled with suspicion, sharpened by quiet betrayal. He had crossed the line from husband to judge, hiring a private investigator behind her back, convinced that truth no longer lived in her words. The man he chose was ruthless, a shadow chaser, who took innocent moments and painted them in guilt. It didn't take long before photos arrived. Serena laughing at a cafe table with a man, hugging him outside her old apartment, smiling as they walked beside a lake. What Dominic didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was that the man was Jordan Monroe, her childhood friend, practically a brother, someone who once held her hand at her mother's funeral and swore to protect her joy. But context doesn't speak through photographs. Dominic flipped through the images like evidence in a trial he had already decided, his hands trembling not with heartbreak but rage. The Dominic, who once wrote poems on her back with his fingers, now paced the hallway like a storm with nowhere to land. When Serena walked through the door that night, humming a soft tune, holding his favorite takeout in her arms, she wasn't met with a kiss. She was met with a stare so cold it could freeze the air around them. "Put it down," he growled, voice low, restrained. Serena blinked, confused. "Dom, what's wrong?" He stepped closer, eyes burning. "Tell me the truth. Who is he?" She looked stunned, stepping back instinctively as the bag dropped from her hands and spilled across the floor. "Who?" she whispered, fear creeping into her tone. "Don't play dumb, Serena," he barked, slamming a file of printed photos on the coffee table. "You thought I wouldn't find out? Hugging him? Smiling like I don't even exist? You think I'm a joke?" Tears welled instantly in her eyes as she opened the folder, confusion giving way to horror. "That's Jordan. He's like a brother to me. You know this isn't what it looks like." But Dominic wasn't listening. His love had turned into a verdict. "Why didn't you tell me you were meeting him? Why hide it?" He spat, stepping closer, his body towering over her. She backed away, voice cracking. "Because you've been distant. I didn't want to add fuel to what I didn't even understand anymore." He grabbed her wrist not violently, but firmly, as if holding on to what he thought was truth slipping away. "Just say it. Say you're cheating. Say you never loved me," he demanded, eyes bloodshot, voice trembling not just with anger but hurt. Serena sobbed, pulling her hand away. "I swear to you, I've never touched another man in that way. You're the only man I've ever loved, the only one I've ever given myself to." But Dominic's silence was louder than her pleas. He turned away, jaw clenched, the war between his heart and ego raging inside. She approached him slowly, trembling, wrapping her arms around him from behind, whispering, "Please, don't let this ruin us. Don't let lies win." But even her touch, once healing, now burned against his skin, as if every reminder of her love felt like a question mark he could no longer answer. He peeled her arms off like regret, walking toward the window, gripping the ledge as if it could hold him up when his world was tilting. Serena stood behind him, weeping, her voice a soft wreck. "How can you doubt me after everything we've been through?" He turned slowly, face unreadable, and said the cruelest thing she'd ever heard from him. "Maybe I never really knew you." The words struck like a slap, and she staggered back as if air had left the room. She covered her mouth, unable to breathe, unable to process how quickly love could rot into suspicion. "So that's it," she whispered. "One lie, and you believe it over me?" He didn't answer. His silence said it all. That night, Serena slept on the couch, curled up with a blanket of shame, while Dominic laid in their bed alone, replaying every moment with her, questioning smiles, doubting memories, turning joy into doubt. Even her laughter from weeks ago now sounded like deception in his ears. And all the while, the truth remained pure but love poisoned by mistrust cannot see clearly. The next morning, she tried again, made breakfast, wore his favorite perfume, reached for his hand, but he pulled away, saying, "I need space." Her heart cracked like porcelain. "You already built the wall," she whispered. "I'm just watching you walk behind it." She left that afternoon to clear her mind, and Dominic watched from the window, unsure if he wanted her to come back. What neither of them knew, what fate was already writing, was that this night, these lies, this fracture would be the beginning of the end. Love was still there, but it was drowning in the storm he had chosen to believe. The next morning came with no warning, no apology, only silence thick enough to strangle hope. And when Serena returned home, expecting an explanation, a chance, even a flicker of belief, what she found was a suitcase waiting by the door and divorce papers on the table, already signed in ink that had long since dried. Dominic didn't speak at first, just stood by the window in a tailored suit, not even turning to meet her eyes, as if looking at her would make his resolve tremble. Serena's hands shook as she picked up the papers, her voice barely audible. "You really believe I betrayed you?" But Dominic's face was stone, his words colder than winter air. "I can't live in a lie, Serena. I won't." The knife twisted deeper not because of what he said, but how easily he said it. Like their love was a contract that had expired, not a life they had built together. She fell to her knees, not from weakness but from the weight of disbelief, tears soaking through the carpet as she whispered, "You didn't even ask. You never even let me explain." Dominic closed his eyes, jaw tight, trying to pretend her cries weren't ripping through his soul. "It's done," he said, walking away as if she were a stranger, renting space in his past. Serena sat alone for hours after he left, staring at the ring on her finger until her vision blurred, then slowly slid it off, like she was peeling away the last piece of a dream. The media caught wind within 24 hours. Headlines screamed betrayal. Paparazzi camped outside her building, hurling questions and judgments. "Gold digger," they whispered. "Cheater," they printed. Reporters followed her to the grocery store, shoved cameras in her face as she clutched her coat tightly and walked faster, shielding herself from lies she never deserved. Friends disappeared afraid of the scandal, or unsure what to believe, leaving Serena to face a world that had turned against her. What no one knew, not even Dominic, was that within her breaking body, new life had quietly begun to grow. Serena found out 2 weeks after the divorce, in a dimly lit bathroom with shaking hands holding a test that turned positive in seconds. The first thing she did was cry, not from fear but from grief, that the man she once gave her soul to would never witness the life they created out of love. She clutched her stomach and whispered, "I'll protect you, even if I have to do it alone." She wrote him a letter, pages of truth, of pain, of love, but never sent it. What was the point, when he'd already buried her in his memory? Dominic wiped her existence like erasing chalk from a board, blocked her number, changed the locks, and even fired any employee who dared speak her name in the office. He donated the gifts she gave him, replaced the sheets they once shared, and redecorated the house to eliminate the scent of her perfume that still lingered like a ghost. To the world, he was composed a man who moved on swiftly but in private. He drank too much, worked too late, and stood in the mirror, asking himself if he had made a mistake. Yet, pride chained him from searching for truth. Meanwhile, Serena packed what little she had left and moved out of state, wearing oversized clothes to hide the small bump that began to show. She took on 2 jobs, cleaning hotel rooms in the mornings, waiting tables at night, doing everything to make sure the child growing inside her would never feel unwanted. She spoke to her unborn baby every night, telling them stories about a father who once kissed her forehead like she was treasure before the storm came. "He loved us once," she whispered. "He just forgot how." Each day grew heavier, each night colder, but she carried on alone, betrayed and abandoned, yet never broken. Months passed, and her belly grew round, firm, sacred. She didn't post online, didn't reach out to old friends. She disappeared from the map entirely, a ghost in her own life. Dominic, on the other hand, chased deals, flew to countries, slept beside women he didn't know, just to forget the warmth of one woman he truly loved. Yet, even in the arms of strangers, he couldn't forget Serena's touch, the way she used to fall asleep mid-sentence, the way she hummed when she was nervous, the scent of her coconut shampoo on his pillows. But every time he tried to recall her innocence, the image of her with another man returned like a dagger to his chest. He didn't know those memories were lies. Serena gave birth to twins on a rainy Tuesday, and boy and one girl, both with his eyes. She named them Eli and Emery, holding them close against her chest and sobbing softly. "Your father doesn't know you exist, but I promise you'll never feel his absence." She worked harder than ever, nursing them between shifts, never complaining, never asking for pity. Her nights were spent rocking 2 cribs, her days juggling bills and bottles. But every now and then, she would look at their faces and see Dominic and wonder if he ever thought about her. In the quiet moments, she would whisper to herself, "You didn't just break my heart, you crushed a soul that loved you beyond reason." But she no longer said it with bitterness, only with the kind of sorrow that makes a woman stronger. Serena didn't need revenge. She didn't want his apology. All she wanted now was peace. Serena didn't look back. Not once she boarded the late-night bus, with two infants wrapped in second-hand blankets and a duffel bag full of memories she no longer had room to carry. Her old life was behind her now, sealed shut like a book whose pages had been scorched by betrayal. She traveled through cities where no one knew her name, where reporters hadn't poisoned her image, where strangers didn't look at her like she was the woman who ruined a millionaire's fairy tale. With her twins nestled against her chest, she arrived in Lisbon, Portugal, jet-lagged, scared, but determined to begin again, somewhere far from gossip columns and Dominic's ghost. Her first nights were spent in a run-down hostel that smelled of old smoke and bleach, her babies crying through paper-thin walls as she hushed them softly, promising, "Mama's got you. Mama's not going anywhere." She took the first job she could get, cleaning hotel bathrooms before sunrise, scrubbing floors while her body ached from birth and heartbreak, but she never once complained. In every mirror she polished, she whispered to her reflection, "You're still standing." She'd sling Emery on her back, cradle Eli in a cloth sling across her chest, and push a mop with one hand while humming lullabies through cracked lips. At night, she studied Portuguese from library books, slowly learning how to blend into a country that didn't ask questions. The hotel manager, a kind older woman named Isabella, noticed Serena's quiet discipline and eventually promoted her to receptionist, handing her a blazer and saying, "You belong at the front, not hidden in the shadows." It was the first compliment Serena had heard in over a year, and it nearly made her cry. She saved every euro she earned, often skipping meals so her twins could have fresh milk, and she made a game of hunger so the babies never sensed the sacrifice behind her smile. Her apartment was small, one bedroom, peeling paint, a flickering kitchen bulb, but it was theirs. She painted stars on the ceiling with dollar store glow paint, so Eli and Emery would dream of galaxies instead of emptiness. When they cried from teething or nightmares, she'd hold both in her arms and whisper, "The world didn't want us, but we still belong to each other." She gave them joy in crumbs and laughter in struggle, teaching them how to dance barefoot on cracked tiles and sing before speaking full sentences. They never knew what they lacked, because their mother gave them everything that mattered. She kept every document locked in a box beneath the bed, birth certificates with no father's name, old ultrasound images she couldn't bear to destroy, and one photo of Dominic, torn at the edges, hidden in an envelope. She never showed the twins his face, never spoke his name. But sometimes, when Emery tilted her head just so, or Eli squinted the way Dominic used to, when thinking her heart would clench, and she'd turn away before tears could answer, Serena built a routine made of sacrifice and silence. Wake at dawn, walk the twins to daycare, change into her uniform, greet hotel guests with grace, then return home to make pasta from scratch because it was cheaper than buying it. On weekends, she worked overtime to afford books and small toys, determined her children would never feel second best. She never dated, never allowed herself the softness of companionship, believing love had done enough damage to her soul. When loneliness crept in, she'd bury herself in bedtime stories and twin giggles, letting their warmth be enough. She watched other couples pass by the hotelman, holding women's hands, fathers lifting their kids, and she'd smile politely. But deep inside, a question always lingered. Would Dominic have been proud of them? But she pushed the thought away each time, reminding herself that the man who walked away without asking never earned the right to know. On Eli and Emery's third birthday, she couldn't afford a cake, so she made one out of stacked pancakes with jam smiles on top, and when they clapped in joy, she wept quietly in the kitchen. Her life was built on invisible triumphs, rent paid on time, fever cured with steam and prayer, bruises from mopping hidden beneath long sleeves. No one saw the war she fought daily. No one knew the courage it took to live with dignity while carrying scars the world never saw. But she kept going. She attended a local course in hospitality, graduated top of her class, and was offered a management trainee role. Her babies were growing. Emery sang to herself when she played, and Eli began building castles from blocks, always telling Serena, "We're making a big house, Mommy, just for us." And still, in the silence of midnight, Serena would sit by the window, look at the moon, and wonder if somewhere Dominic looked at the same sky. Not because she wanted him back, but because a part of her still hoped he had a soul that missed what he lost. But she never reached out, never broke the silence, never tried to fix what he never cared to understand. Her heart had once bled for him, but now it beat only for the two little miracles she carried through fire. Serena Brooks had vanished into shadows, but in those shadows she had become a fortress, quiet, unshaken, and deeply, beautifully whole. 5 years slipped by like smoke through Dominic Wade's clenched fists, slow, bitter, and suffocating, and though the world still praised his brilliance, toasted his billion-dollar acquisitions, and applauded his ruthless efficiency in boardrooms, behind closed doors he was a man carved hollow by regret he refused to name. Serena's name was never spoken in his circle again, not by friends, not by staff, not even by himself yet. Her presence haunted every quiet hour, like perfume on a memory. He buried himself in spreadsheets, partnerships, and takeovers, pretending the ticking of clocks was progress and not time leaving him behind. His mornings were mechanical, gym, black coffee, 3 news outlets, then silence, always silence. He didn't let anyone in, didn't entertain relationships past physical convenience, and any woman who dared get too close was dismissed with brutal indifference. "You're not her," he muttered once to a woman he couldn't even remember the name of, after she reached for his hand in the dark. His nights were the worst when the world went quiet, and his bed felt too large when he closed his eyes and saw Serena's tearful face from the day she knelt beside those divorce papers. It haunted him like a curse he couldn't outrun, like a ghost he'd created with his own bare hands. He drank more than he used to, scotch with no ice, like he needed the burn to remind him he was still capable of feeling something. The whispers around him changed, was no longer the charming tycoon, but the man with a frozen heart and razor-sharp tongue. Assistants cried behind office doors. Executives avoided casual conversation. "He's colder than marble," someone once said, and Dominic had overheard it, but didn't deny it. He was colder, crueler, sharper. Emotion was a cost he couldn't afford anymore, not when it had once tricked him into believing love was safe. His jaw tightened whenever he saw couples holding hands on sidewalks, or fathers lifting toddlers into the air. Those images hit too close to a life he'd abandoned without knowing the full story. Sometimes, without meaning to, he'd find himself searching the faces of strangers, scanning crowds for something he didn't know what. Or maybe he did, and he just wouldn't admit it. Serena's laugh still echoed in his memory at odd hours. Her voice would crawl back in moments of stillness, whispering things she used to say. "You're more than your money, Dominic, or you don't have to carry the world alone." And every time he remembered, he'd shut his eyes tighter, as if trying to lock her out of his mind. But love doesn't die from silence. It lingers in the bones, in the blood. He once stood on the balcony of a hotel he had purchased, looked out over the skyline, and murmured to no one, "What if I was wrong?" But pride is a prison, and Dominic wore its uniform with perfection. No one dared question him. No one mentioned her. But late at night, when lightning streaked across the sky or jazz played in a restaurant unexpectedly, his breath would hitch and memories of Serena would flood back like a storm no wall could hold back. One night, he stared at an old photograph tucked in a desk drawer, the only surviving image of her he hadn't thrown away. He traced her face with his thumb and whispered, "Where did you go?" Then snapped the drawer shut, like closing a wound he didn't want to bleed again. He told himself she had moved on, found another man, maybe even started a family. And that thought made him furious. Not because he still loved her, he wouldn't let himself say that, but because the idea that she could survive without him shattered the illusion that he had been her everything. He built walls of steel around his emotions, surrounded himself with yes-men and numbers, rejecting anything that resembled vulnerability. At an executive dinner, a younger partner asked him casually if he'd ever been in love. Dominic chuckled dryly, glass in hand, eyes unreadable. "Love?" he said coldly. "That's a lie rich men can't afford." The table laughed nervously, but no one saw the way his hand tightened around the glass, veins bulging as memories clawed their way back up his spine. He couldn't go near the hotel where they had their honeymoon. He sold it. Couldn't drive the same car they used to take late-night rides in, had it crushed and replaced. He deleted old playlists, shredded handwritten notes, even replaced the scent of his cologne, because it reminded him of how she'd bury her face in his chest and breathe him in like he was home. And yet, nothing erased her. She was in the way his body ached during rainstorms, in the instinct to reach across the bed in the middle of the night, only to find air. He used to dream of her soft dreams, sometimes cruel ones where she'd reach for him, then vanish the moment he blinked. He'd wake up gasping, whispering her name into his palm, and then curse himself for saying it. His empire grew, yes, more countries, more deals, more headlines, but his soul shrank. The bigger his legacy became, the lonelier his life felt. Sometimes he would see a woman in the street, just a flash of a braid, the curve of a smile, and his heart would jump until he realized it wasn't her, couldn't be her. She was gone, just like his peace, just like the man he used to be before doubt took the wheel. He didn't know where she'd gone, didn't know she was raising the pieces of the love they made. All he knew was that 5 years had passed, and nothing, not power, not time, not denial, had been strong enough to silence the ache that still lived where her love used to be. The ache never left him. But Dominic Wade had learned how to walk through fire, with his suit still pressed, and his jaw locked tight, pain buried beneath power, and ghosts drowned beneath business meetings and merger contracts. When the invitation came to finalize the acquisition of a historic hotel chain in Lisbon, he didn't hesitate. Portugal was just another pin on his empire map. He stepped off the jet in his signature black tailored suit, flanked by security and senior executives, his presence commanding, unreadable steel. The airport buzzed with noise, footsteps, foreign languages, and the rhythmic hum of luggage wheels, but Dominic was focused, checking his watch, already calculating time zones and shareholder updates until it happened. He turned a corner toward the VIP arrival lounge, and in the blink of an eye, the world stopped. His body froze. His breath caught like a hand around his throat. Through the glass partition ahead, across a sea of waiting passengers and signs, stood a woman he hadn't seen in 5 agonizing years. Serena. She hadn't aged, no, she had evolved. Her braided hair framed a face that was still impossibly beautiful, glowing even under cheap airport lights. Her posture calm, her smile soft until his gaze dropped and shattered into disbelief. Standing beside her were 2 children, a boy and a girl, twins, around 4 or 5 years old, and both of them had his eyes, blue, striking, identical, the same shape, the same fire. One clutched her hand while the other played with her long coat. Dominic's pulse thundered in his ears as logic failed to hold him. He blinked, as if the glass had lied, as if trauma had conjured this out of nowhere. But they were real, alive, breathing, and undeniably his. "Sir?" one of his associates asked, confused by his sudden stop. But Dominic couldn't speak. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He just stared, paralyzed by 1,000 memories crashing into a single impossible moment. Serena hadn't seen him, yet she was busy adjusting the boy's scarf, kneeling to fix the girl's shoe, her movements gentle and motherly, completely unaware she was unraveling the tightly stitched seams of the man who once left her behind. Dominic took a step forward, then another, unable to stop himself, eyes locked on the children who wore his DNA like a secret weapon. The resemblance was brutal. His mouth, their noses, his exact eyebrow arch, there was no room left for denial. His security moved aside instinctively, sensing something seismic in his body language. He approached the glass slowly, as if afraid Any sudden movement would break the moment and... Then just as he reached the barrier, Serena finally looked up. Their eyes met. Time collapsed. Her expression shifted in a heartbeat from peace to shock, from comfort to confrontation, as if every bone in her body remembered who he was and what he'd done. For a split second, neither moved. Her lips parted, her hand tightening protectively around the little girl's arm. Dominic couldn't speak, couldn't raise his hand, couldn't process the hurricane ripping through him. All he could do was stare and see it all. The 5 years he lost, the sleepless nights, the truths he never asked, the lives he never knew he'd shaped. The children his children looked up, following their mother's line of sight, and for the first time, his daughter locked eyes with him. She tilted her head slightly, curious. His son clutched her sleeve, whispering something, and Serena's throat visibly tightened. Dominic stepped closer to the glass, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the noise of the airport. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't grief. This was reality undeniable, staggering, and laced with the bitter taste of guilt. A million questions clawed at his chest. How? Why didn't she tell me? Do they know who I am? But the answers didn't matter, yet not in this moment. Because the only truth he could feel was that he had destroyed something irreplaceable. And now, it was standing on the other side of a glass wall alive and real and looking back at him like fate had grown tired of waiting. Serena's eyes were unreadable, a fortress built from pain and pride, but something inside them flickered recognition, maybe heartbreak, maybe strength. She didn't move toward him. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply stood her ground, gripping her children close, the very image of a woman who had survived without him and didn't need permission to keep doing so. Dominic swallowed hard, hands clenched at his sides, the weight of 5 years crashing against his ribcage. In his ears echoed the last words she ever said to him, "You didn't just break my heart, you crushed a soul that loved you beyond reason." And now that soul had turned into 2 beating hearts he never knew he had. For the first time in years, Dominic Wade, billionaire, mogul, master of control, felt completely, irreversibly undone. The glass between them became a fragile line between past and present. And in that suspended breath of silence, everything that once burned between them ignited again. But this time, it wasn't passion. It was truth, clawing its way to the surface. Serena's pulse thundered in her throat as her gaze remained locked with Dominic's, her body frozen, her fingers tightening instinctively around her children. The buzz of the airport faded behind a deafening silence. Then, as if guided by some divine instinct, Eli looked up at his mother, then at the tall stranger beyond the glass, curiosity bright in his sky-blue eyes, and pointed innocently, "Mommy, that man looks like me." His voice gentle. Unaware split Serena's composure like a blade, and Dominic staggered backward a step, the words hitting him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. His heart surged. He moved, fast, navigating around the barrier, leaving behind his startled entourage and pushing through the crowd like a man chasing his life. "Serena!" he shouted, voice raw, cracking through the air. She didn't move at first. Her shoulders stiffened, her grip on the twins tightening, and Dominic finally reached her, breathing heavy, standing a breath away from the woman he thought he'd lost forever, and the children he never knew he had. "Serena, are they mine?" he asked, voice trembling, no longer the voice of a billionaire, but a broken man, desperate for a truth he couldn't ignore any longer. Serena stared at him, no anger, no tears, just an ache so ancient it had no words left. Her silence stretched like eternity between them. She blinked once, slowly, the pain in her eyes unflinching, and then, without answering, she turned away. Her hand slid gently into Eli's, her other reaching for Emery's, and with a steady grace born of survival, she walked into the sea of people, disappearing step by step into the tide of travelers. Dominic stood frozen, like a man left standing in the rubble of a city he once burned himself. His chest heaved, eyes darting through the crowd, trying to follow them, but the wave of strangers closed behind her like a curtain drawn by fate. "Serena!" He called again, louder this time, chasing after her, but she didn't look back. Her figure vanished into the terminal's shadow, swallowed by the very life he was never meant to see. He stopped running when he reached the exit doors, breath short, hands shaking. It was her. It was real. Those were his children, and she had walked away without confirming what he already knew deep in his blood. Shock, regret, and grief fought for space in his chest as reality caved in like an avalanche. People passed him, without noticing that the man standing still in the middle of Lisbon's international airport wasn't a titan of industry today, but a father lost in the wake of the truth he had once buried. His assistant called his name, but he didn't hear. A child's laugh echoed nearby Emery's voice, but it was someone else. The truth had struck, and now it echoed in every heartbeat, every breath, every second that ticked by without her there. He turned slowly, dazed, walking like a man underwater, unsure if he was still awake or trapped in some cruel illusion. Her silence screamed louder than any answer. She had seen him, and still chosen to walk away. Why? Did she hate him that much? Had he hurt her so deeply that even truth couldn't build a bridge back to him? Or was she protecting the children from the man who had once doubted her soul? He collapsed into the nearest airport bench, raking his hands through his hair, replaying the image of Eli's face again and again, the resemblance undeniable. The line of his jaw, the tilt of his head. Emery's smile, his mother's smile. He had missed it all. Their first words, their first steps, birthdays, bedtime stories, all of it. And the guilt hit him like a freight train. He had walked away from a woman who carried his legacy, who built a home without his help, who taught love without resentment. He cursed himself for ever listening to Trevor Knox, for ever doubting her loyalty, for letting pride make decisions that love should have guided. He stared at the terminal exit, hoping she'd walk back through those doors. But she didn't. The airport was just noise, now an echo of the earthquake that cracked his entire foundation. He pulled out his phone, opened his private contacts, scrolled past names of CEOs, politicians, and celebrities and paused over the number he had blocked 5 years ago. Her name still glowed there, Serena Brooks. He stared at it, thumb hovering, then dropped the phone in his lap, unable to press dial. She was in the same city, breathing the same air, and still felt galaxies away. He finally stood, looking out the glass one more time, whispering to himself, "You didn't just vanish, Serena. You raised my future while I lived in ignorance." The truth had arrived not with a knock, but like a thunderclap, and now it wouldn't let go. For the first time in half a decade, Dominic Wade didn't know what came next. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away again. The airport encounter shattered the dam. Dominic had spent 5 years fortifying, and now that the truth had erupted into his life, he couldn't breathe without needing answers. The weight of seeing Serena again, of seeing his children pressed on his chest like a second skin, making every heartbeat scream her name. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat by the hotel window, overlooking Lisbon's ancient rooftops, gripping a Scotch glass he never drank from, his thoughts spiraling into desperation. Morning came, but his mind was already racing ahead. By noon, he'd deployed every resource in his arsenal, contacting local authorities under the guise of business security, hiring 3 private investigators, and pushing his Lisbon hotel partners to track down any employee records or apartment leases under the name Serena Brooks. His assistant had never seen him like this, his orders sharp, frantic, layered with something more dangerous than urgency: guilt. Every meeting was postponed, every deal paused, every call ignored unless it led him closer to her. Within 48 hours, one investigator returned with a report. Serena Brooks, supervisor at a small boutique hotel in Alfama district, lives in a modest apartment nearby. Has 2 registered dependents, single mother, no known partners. Dominic gripped the paper like it was scripture. That night, He stood across the street from the hotel she worked in, watching from a distance as she exited in a navy blazer, her hair pulled back, clipboard in hand, face composed, radiant in a way pain often polishes strength. She didn't see him, but he saw everything, her confidence, her grace, the way staff looked to her with respect, and it gutted him. This was the woman he threw away, the woman he once doubted, the mother of his children, raising them in silence while he dined with board members and drowned in denial. The next morning, he sent flowers to the hotel card, just blue hydrangeas, her favorite, but they were returned to the front desk within the hour. Later that afternoon, he left a letter, hand-delivered, sealed with shaking hands. "Please meet me. I don't want explanations. I just want a chance to listen, to see them, to see you, Dominic." But she never replied. The receptionist said she read it, folded it once, and placed it in her desk drawer without a word. He returned the next day, standing in the lobby, heart pounding. She saw him. Her eyes met his. Then she turned and walked into her office, shutting the door like the final chapter of a book he never deserved to finish. He waited hours. Nothing. On the third attempt, she sent a message through a junior staff member. "Mr. Wade, Ms. Brooks respectfully declines any personal meetings." His breath hitched, his pride burned. But he wasn't angry, he was unraveling. Every rejection was a mirror, reflecting the weight of what he had done. He didn't blame her. How could he? He had believed rumors over her truth. He had abandoned her at her most vulnerable. He had vanished while she carried life inside his life. And now, she had built a world without him. A world he wasn't welcome in. He drove past her apartment building one evening, saw the lights on, heard laughter through an open window. He paused, heard Eli's voice, soft and muffled, asking for a bedtime story. Dominic stood in the dark, aching to go inside, to kneel and say, "I'm your father." But he knew it wasn't his right, not yet. The next day he wrote another letter, longer this time. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here because I finally see everything I was too blind to believe. I missed their first laugh, their first steps, the nights you must have cried alone. Let me make this right. I know I can't rewrite history, but please don't let me be a stranger in their future." But again, no reply. Serena remained silent, but her silence screamed the truth he'd buried. She didn't owe him her pain. She had healed without his apology, had carried life, built a home, fought storms, and found peace all on her own. When a journalist from Lisbon's elite society column caught wind of his sudden disappearance from public life, the headlines speculated everything from bankruptcy to secret illness, but the truth was far more human. Dominic Wade, once untouchable, was now a man chasing the very things he once cast aside. He drove himself mad, looking for signs she might open a door, give a sliver of response. But Serena had learned the difference between closure and reopening old wounds. When a friend asked why she wouldn't see him, she replied softly, "He doubted me when I needed him the most. I don't owe him my pain." And that was her truth. She wasn't angry, she was whole. She had become the storm and the calm. And Dominic, for all his wealth and power, stood outside the life she built, hoping, hurting, haunted. Dominic sat in silence inside the Lisbon penthouse he no longer found comfort in, surrounded by city lights that flickered like lies too long unspoken. His tie hung loose around his neck, shirt creased from days of obsession, and the air was thick with the weight of unanswered letters and doors closed in his face. Then came the knock, sharp, urgent, unexpected. His assistant stood in the doorway moments later, holding a sealed envelope. "It was delivered by courier," she said quietly, eyes unsure. Dominic took it with trembling hands, recognizing the handwriting immediately. Trevor Knox. His stomach dropped. Trevor, the man who whispered poison into his heart, the man who planted the seed that destroyed his marriage. That Trevor, he hadn't heard from him in years, not since Trevor moved to Miami after an internal scandal and an ugly fallout. With a slow breath, Dominic opened the envelope, unaware that his entire foundation was about to collapse. Inside, a letter, handwritten. The ink smudged in places, as if written in pain. The heading chilled him. "If you're reading this, I'm gone." His heart began to race. The words that followed were a confession so brutal, so raw, it cracked him open. "I was in a car crash last week. Doctors say I won't make it. Maybe that's why the guilt finally caught up to me. Dominic, I lied. Serena was never unfaithful. I made it all up. I was jealous. You loved her, and she loved you back. No woman ever looked at me the way she looked at you. I saw her as a threat to our empire. I thought you'd lose yourself in her softness. So I planted the idea, told you lies, sent those photos, hired that private eye, and fed him false leads. She was innocent. She always was. And I ruined her. You ruined her because of me. I'm sorry. I know sorry means nothing now. But you need to know she never betrayed you. She just loved you. That's all she ever did." The letter slipped from Dominic's hand and fell to the floor like a verdict dropped from heaven. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. His knees buckled, and for the first time in years, the billionaire who had ruled boardrooms and crushed empires dropped to the ground like a man stripped of everything. He didn't cry softly, he broke, violently. His fists hit the hardwood. His voice cracked as he whispered, "No, no, no," over and over again, as if begging time to rewind. He saw Serena's tear-stained face the night he accused her, heard her scream, "You're the only man I've ever loved," felt the tremble of her hands as she held his face, begging him to believe her. And he didn't. He threw her out, let the world devour her, let shame bury her name all, based on a lie whispered by a coward. "I destroyed everything," he muttered, voice hoarse, his face pressed to the cold floor, tears dripping like rain from a man who hadn't wept in a decade. Everything pure, everything real. His chest heaved with sobs that scraped against his ribs. The moments flashed like a cruel slideshow, her in her wedding dress, glowing, her laugh on the rooftop, her whisper in his ear, "Don't ever doubt us." And he had. He doubted. He destroyed. And now it was too late to fix what had been scorched into ashes. He crawled to the letter, read it again, hoping it had changed, hoping it would say she lied, not him. But it didn't. Trevor Knox, selfish and cold in life, had chosen truth as a final confession in death. Dominic punched the floor again, cursing himself, whispering Serena's name like a prayer he no longer deserved to utter. His empire felt meaningless. The hotel chain deal felt empty. The awards on the shelf looked like mocking trophies for a man who failed at the one thing that mattered, love. He stood hours later, broken but burning with purpose. He stared at the mirror and didn't recognize the man reflected. "You let fear become your truth," he said out loud, voice shaking. "And now they live without you because of it. But not anymore." He grabbed the letter, folded it with reverence, and placed it inside his inner coat pocket close to his chest, where it would stay until he earned the right to share it. He knew it wouldn't fix things. He knew Serena might never forgive him. But he owed her truth, not apologies, not flowers, just truth finally. He left the penthouse that night, not as a millionaire, not as a tycoon, but as a man finally facing the storm. He started. And this time, he wouldn't run. Dominic stood at the entrance of the boutique hotel once again, but this time he wasn't the same man who had come begging days ago. This time, he carried the weight of truth in his breast pocket and the shattered pieces of his pride scattered in his soul. The Lisbon sky above him was overcast, wind brushing through the trees like a whispered warning. He waited until the lobby quieted, until guests had cleared out and the front desk attendant had gone to the back then. He walked in, firm and steady, and asked, "Is Serena Brooks available?" The receptionist glanced at him warily, recognizing the intensity in his voice, and made a call without speaking. Minutes later, the office door creaked open. Serena stepped out, her chin held high, her black blazer sharp against her caramel skin, and her eyes those deep, knowing eyes met his with a calm that was both familiar and foreign. "What do you want now?" she asked plainly, voice cool, arms folded like armor. Dominic didn't rush. He didn't beg. He reached slowly into his coat, pulled out the folded letter, and held it out. "This," he said, his voice rough, "is the truth I should have waited for before I destroyed us." Serena didn't move. She stared at him for several heartbeats, then gently took the paper, unfolding it with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the words Trevor's handwriting, Trevor's confession. Her jaw clenched, her nostrils flared, and for a moment her hand shook slightly, the paper rattling in her grip. But she didn't cry. She had cried all those tears long ago. When she finished, she folded it carefully and placed it on the reception desk beside her. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but deadly precise. "So now you know. And what do you want from me, Dominic? Gratitude? Forgiveness? Closure?" He stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper, heavy with remorse. "I want to give you what I never did, the truth. I was blind, Serena. I didn't protect you. I didn't protect our children. I let someone else's lie become more powerful than your love, and for that I will never forgive myself." Serena blinked, holding back the flood inside her. Her throat tightened, but she stayed composed. "You didn't trust me," she said slowly, each word like a gavel. "And love without trust is a cage. I lived in that cage once, and I broke free." Dominic's chest constricted. Her words stabbed deeper than any silence ever could. He looked down, ashamed. "You didn't deserve any of it," he said. "I accused you, I erased you, and I walked away while you were carrying my legacy inside you. If I could go back, I would rip time apart to choose you." Serena took a deep breath, stepping slightly closer, though not near enough to touch. "You can't rewrite the past, Dominic. I raised our children in a world that didn't know your name, not out of spite but protection. I couldn't let them grow up chasing the approval of a man who doubted their mother's worth." Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. "You hurt me in a way no apology can fix." Dominic nodded, swallowing pain that clawed up his throat. "I know, but they deserve to know who I am. Even if you never look at me the same again, please, let me be a father to them. Let me earn my place, if not in your heart then in theirs." Serena looked up at the ceiling for a second, as if asking the universe for strength. Then she stared back into his eyes and said, "You can't just waltz in and erase the absence. You don't just show up with flowers and a confession and fix 5 years of silence. Being their father isn't a role, it's a responsibility. And it's earned, not given." The air between them was thick with truth, sharp with emotion, and silent for a long beat. Finally, Dominic whispered, "What would it take for you to even consider letting me try?" Serena's eyes softened, just slightly, but her spine stayed straight. "Consistency, honesty, and time," she said. "You want to be in their lives? Then start by showing up without fanfare. No more money, no more control, just be there. Quietly, patiently, until they know your name, not because I told them, but because your presence speaks it." Dominic's eyes glistened, his head nodding slowly. "I will," he said, voice cracking. "Even if it takes the rest of my life, I'll be there." Serena nodded once, then picked up the letter again, folding it and slipping it into her purse note as a keepsake, but as a record. A scar turned into a page. She didn't invite him in. She didn't ask him to stay, but she didn't tell him to leave either. And in that small space between past and possibility, Dominic Wade took his first real breath in years, because for the first time, the door wasn't locked. It was just closed. Not forever, but not yet open. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of redemption. The days that followed were slow, deliberate, and unlike anything Dominic had ever experienced. No contracts to sign, no boardrooms to conquer, only the quiet ache of waiting, hoping, praying that Serena's heart might open just enough for him to step into the shadows of the life he had missed. He didn't call, didn't send more flowers or letters. He walked through Lisbon's streets like a man rediscovering the rhythm of humility, spending hours parked near a small park where Serena often brought the twins after school. He never approached, just watched from afar as they laughed, raced through the grass, or sat on the bench with their mother between them, like bookends of a life he never got to read. Then one morning, as the city yawned awake under the pale glow of sunrise, a message buzzed on his phone. One line, one miracle. "Come at Arbra. No promises, just presence. Serena." His hands trembled as he reread the text. At precisely 4, he stood outside the modest apartment complex, clutching nothing but the weight in his chest. Serena opened the door slowly, her eyes unreadable, and nodded silently. Inside, the walls were warm and worn, scattered with crayons, tiny shoes, and innocent chaos. On the living room carpet, Eli sat cross-legged with colored pencils, scribbling cars with surprising detail. Emery sat by the window, humming softly to herself, rocking a tiny doll in her arms, the late afternoon sun painting a halo across her curls. They both looked up as he entered. Dominic froze. The air vanished from his lungs. His eyes locked on their sand. It was like staring into mirrors of his soul. He took a cautious step forward, unsure if his presence would frighten them. But Eli tilted his head with curious confidence and said, "Hi, are you Mommy's friend?" Dominic swallowed the lump in his throat. "I'm someone very lucky to meet you," he whispered. Emery stood up and padded closer, her doll still in hand. She stared hard at him, then pointed gently, her voice soft and puzzled. "Why are your eyes like mine?" Dominic fell to his knees, his hands trembling, and for the first time in his life he didn't have a prepared speech, a rehearsed line, or a polished explanation. Just the truth, raw and shaking. He looked between them, tears welling as he breathed. "Because you're my heartbeats I never knew I lost." Silence filled the room, soft and sacred. Serena stood in the hallway, watching quietly, her arms crossed tightly, her heart both aching and guarded. Eli crawled a little closer, holding up a red sports car he had drawn. "I like cars. I want to make real ones one day. Mommy says I'm smart." Dominic smiled, his lips trembling. "She's right. You are." Emery twirled, letting her curls bounce, then returned to her doll, placing it gently in his lap. "Her name's June. You can hold her for a minute." That single gesture broke something in Dominic. A flood of tears slid down his cheeks as he cradled the tiny fabric doll, imagining the years of birthdays missed, the giggles he never heard, the scraped knees he hadn't kissed. He looked up at them and whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have been here. I should have known. But I'm here now, if you'll let me be." Eli nodded solemnly, as if he somehow understood the gravity of the moment. "Are you going to stay for dinner?" he asked simply. Dominic glanced at Serena, who said nothing but didn't interrupt. He turned back and whispered, "If it's okay with your mom, I'd love to." Emery smiled for the first time, then climbed into his lap without hesitation, resting her head against his chest. That small weight undid him completely. His arms wrapped around her like he was holding sunlight, warmth he thought he'd never feel. Serena remained still in the hallway, lips pressed tight, blinking back emotion she didn't want him to see. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reunion. It was the first brick in a bridge he would have to build stone by stone. But for now, Dominic Wade sat on the living room floor, cradling a child he'd never known, watching another draw dreams on paper, and letting the quiet music of home he'd never heard before wash over him like redemption. For the first time in his life, the man who had built skyscrapers felt small and grateful, and finally, he felt like a father. The evening they shared dinner felt like a miracle stitched together with fragile thread. Dominic sat across the table from his children, learning the rhythm of their laughs, the softness of their questions, and the stories Serena had raised them with in his absence. And while his heart brimmed with gratitude, a silent fire burned deeper longing for the woman across from him, the one who had once been his universe. Over the next few days, Dominic poured himself into every effort to rebuild not just his bond with the twins, but the bridge to Serena's heart. He arrived with bouquets of wildflowers, not roses, because he remembered she once said roses were too obvious. He dropped off books for the twins, each inscribed with messages like, "For Eli, may your imagination take you further than any car ever could," and, "For Emery, may your voice always carry love like your mother's." Then came the invitations lunch at a quiet oceanside restaurant, a family outing to the zoo, and finally, a candlelit dinner for two on a rooftop he rented entirely just for her. Serena accepted the lunch and the zoo, but declined the dinner politely. He didn't stop. He arrived one afternoon with a necklacey, a delicate gold chain, with twin pendants etched with their children's initials, and when she held it in her hand, she smiled faintly, but handed it back. "They're beautiful," she whispered, "but they're not what I need." Then came the grandest gesture of all. On a Sunday morning, while Serena and the twins sat at a local park, a string quartet arrived, followed by waiters carrying breakfast baskets, and finally Dominic, stepping onto the grass in a tailored navy suit, holding a velvet box. Onlookers gasped. Serena's heart dropped. "Serena Brooks," he began, voice trembling, kneeling before her. "I have failed you in every way a man can fail the woman he loves, but if there is one prayer I ask the universe to grant me, it's this: let me spend the rest of my life making it right. Marry me again as my forever." A hush fell. The twins looked on, wide-eyed. But Serenazirin, strong, glowing from the scars she had turned into wings, gently placed her hand on the box and pushed it closed. "Dominic," she said softly but firmly, rising to her feet, "I don't want luxury, I want loyalty. And not just when it's easy. You taught me the most important thing I ever learned, to love myself first, to not need validation from a man who once shattered me." The applause that had started from curious onlookers faltered, replaced by quiet tension. Dominic's face fell not in anger, but understanding. Serena turned to their children and smiled. "Come on, babies, let's go get ice cream." But before she walked away, she turned back to him, voice gentler. "You are their father, and for that you'll always be in my life. I'm not shutting the door. I'm just walking through a different one." Dominic stood slowly, tucking the ring box into his jacket like a relic of a love that once was. "So what now?" he asked, voice cracking. Serena breathed in the sea air and said, "We co-parent, with respect, with boundaries, with love for them, not out of guilt, not out of hope that we'll fix the past, but to give them the stability we never had." Her words were steady, mature, unshakable, and though they tore through him like glass, he nodded, because he finally saw her not as the woman he tried to reclaim, but the woman she had become without him. A woman who didn't just survive, soared. Over the following weeks, their rhythm settled into something new. Dominic picked the twins up from school on Tuesdays and Fridays. He attended Emery's piano recital, sat in the second row, clapping with pride. He helped Eli build a model racetrack, marveling at how quickly the boy's hands moved with precision. And every time he stood near Serena, he felt the warmth of what they once had, but now it lived between them as memory, not possibility. Late one evening, he walked her to her door, the twins asleep in the car behind them. "Do you ever think he started, but Serena cut in gently. "Dominic, don't. We're rewriting a new story. One where I don't lose myself to prove I love someone. One where you show up without needing a reward. That's enough. That's everything." He nodded slowly. "And what about us?" She smiled sadly. "We had our time. Now we have our peace." As she walked into the apartment, closing the door softly behind her, Dominic stood there under the Lisbon moonlight, the silence humming with something unfamiliar, not regret, but growth. And maybe, just maybe, that was the second chance he never saw coming. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of Serena's new life began to feel less like healing and more like blooming. The storm that once shattered her had carved space for something resilient to rise, and for the first time in a long time, her dreams were no longer whispers in the dark. They had become blueprints, signed with courage and stitched with her own name. She walked the cobblestone streets of Lisbon with purpose now, not hiding in the shadows of past pain, but walking straight into her future. The paperwork had been finalized, the permit signed. The small weathered building on the corner of Rua das Flores was hers. She painted its soft earth tones, installed windows that let in the morning sun, and named it not after heartbreak, but after rebirth. Brookshaven, a boutique hotel of only 9 rooms, quiet, intentional, and rooted in kindness. Every room had a handwritten quote tucked into the drawer. Every guest was offered tea made from Serena's own recipes. Her twins, now full of laughter and life, helped her choose the art for the lobby walls, Eli insisting on race car prints, and Emery selecting watercolor birds. Word spread quickly about the space run by the elegant woman with the soft smile and fierce energy. Tourists called it charming. Locals called it healing. And behind the scenes, a silent investor made sure Serena never ran out of light bulbs or linens. Dominic never boasted, never asked for credit. He wired the funds under a private holding name, paid the first year's property tax without her knowing, and when she found out months later, she didn't return the money. She simply sent a note that said, "Thank you for believing in the woman you once broke." Dominic showed up when it mattered. He didn't miss parent-teacher meetings. He coached Eli's soccer practices on Saturdays and braided Emery's hair on Wednesdays, clumsy but determined. He never tried to reclaim Serena. Instead, he respected the perimeter she'd drawn and honored the space she needed to breathe as her own woman. Sometimes he'd walk into the hotel lobby to drop off the twins, and she'd be at the desk, laughing with a guest, radiant in a yellow blouse. They'd share a brief nod. Nothing more. But in that silent acknowledgement lived the peace they both fought hard to earn. One crisp evening, after a long day of check-ins and flower arrangements, Serena walked into the staff lounge, dimly lit and quiet. A mirror hung on the wall, simple and tall, and for the first time in years, she paused in front of it not to fix her appearance, but to witness herself. She saw the lines by her eyes, the curves of a body shaped by survival, and the fire still glowing in her gaze. This wasn't the girl who begged for love. This wasn't the wife who was accused. This was a woman who had held grief in one hand and dignity in the other, and built an empire of grace between them. She smiled softly, her reflection smiling back with knowing eyes. Then, in a voice only she could hear, she whispered, "I lost everything, and found myself. That's real love." In that moment, the past didn't matter, not the betrayal, not the whispers, not the storm. What mattered was this woman, rooted and whole, standing tall in her own name, in her own building, under her own sky. Outside, the twins played with chalk on the sidewalk, drawing hearts and suns, and Serena stepped out to watch them, the Lisbon breeze catching her curls, the city lights glowing gold behind her. From across the street, Dominic stood by his car, watching quietly. He didn't approach. He simply placed his hand over his chest, where her voice still lived, and drove away without interrupting her peace. The story didn't end in marriage. It didn't end in fairy tale kisses. It ended in power, in peace, in Serena Brooks choosing herself, not because she was alone, but because she was enough. And that was her happily ever after. Final message. A woman's worth is not defined by the man who failed her, but by the strength she found in her pain. Serena's story is about rising above betrayal, embracing motherhood, and demanding respect, not just love.